So you want to be a master of Pokemon. Do you have the skills to be number one? Well, if you want to be the very best like no one ever was, welcome to the Pokemon Sword and Shield Battle Academy. This is the first episode and it focuses on what makes a competitive Pokemon. And it's all about the stats, because each Pokemon is a unique creature. So we take one Ninetales, we compare it to another Ninetales, and the stats are going to be different. So competitive is about training your Pokemon to be the strongest it can possibly be, and that's done by manipulating three values: the nature of the Pokemon, the individual values, as well as the effort values. Now, since each individual Pokemon is unique, you might have noticed when looking it up on Bulbapedia or Cerebi that there's a large spread for all of the stats. This is just the combination of nature, individual values, and effort values, and it does make a very big difference. The hit points of Ninetales at level 100 can be as low as 256, or you can get almost 100 more hit points by doing everything correctly, and then ending up with a Pokemon that has 350 hit points. Same thing goes for every Pokemon and all of its stats, and that's why you need to train one properly, or else you're going to be at a statistical disadvantage against another competitive player. So what I'm about to say might sound very basic for anyone familiar with competitive, but I've seen a lot of questions and comments that really kind of show that people need to understand this on the most base level. So a Pokemon's nature is one of the most important things about making a competitive Pokemon. Now you can find a Pokemon's nature on its info screen under nature, so that's pretty easy, but what natures do is raise one stat by 10% and then lower another stat by 10%. Also in the hexagon that shows the stats, so it's stat matrix, you can actually figure out what stats are being raised and lowered. The stat in red is raised by 10%, the stat in blue is lowered by 10%. So here we have the hasty nature, which boosts speed and lowers defense. Now, the reason why I'm breaking this down so in depth is because I have seen comments of people saying that stats don't matter. That, 10% isn't that big of a number, when that is incredibly false. I've also had people asking if natures are important, that they have a Pokemon with a wrong nature and they're thinking about just toughing it out anyways, but even then, that's a very bad choice. So what you want to do is put in a little bit of research to finding out the best possible nature on the Pokemon that you are using, and you can do that by looking up a nature chart. There's 24 natures in total, which means that every stat has a combination of being raised and lowered, except for hit points, because hit points are not affected by natures. If you want to modify hit points, you have to do that exclusively through effort values or individual values. So let's take a nature like Timid. Timid is going to raise speed and lower attack, so what you want to do is use that nature on a Pokemon that has a high amount of speed and a high amount of special attack, such as Alakazam, for example. Now, if we look at Alakazam even more, since it does have a high special attack, you can either go with a modest nature, which raises special attack and lowers attack, or you can go for that timid and make sure you are the fastest Pokemon in that speed bracket. Now, speed bracketing and ties and tiers and stuff like that is going to be covered on later in the series, but overall, what you need to know is that if a Pokemon isn't going to be using an offensive value, that's mostly what you're going to be taking away from. So let's take Golem, for example. That Golem is a tank Pokemon. So what we're looking at is that it has a high amount of attack, low amount of special attack, and a low amount of speed, so it might want to be a relaxed or an impish nature. Now, if you want to cut down on speed, that kind of goes into some other possible strategies, but for the most part, you just want impish nature. Not going to be throwing out any special attacks on a Golem, and since you already have a very high defense, you want to put as many points into that defense as possible. So 10% of 130 is going to be more than 10% of 65. So this is going to be utilizing natures to get the highest effective stats out of a Pokemon, but there will be cases where defensive Pokemon might want a special defense nature. That's going to be in the more advanced guides, but right now just kind of focus on getting rid of a stat that the Pokemon isn't going to care about, and then trying to get some benefit out of the other part of the nature. And there's even rare cases where a Pokemon will want to sacrifice defenses, that way it can use all kinds of moves. So Pokemon like Greninja can be a physical and a special attacker at the same time, while also being one of the most frail competitive Pokemon out there. So it doesn't really matter if Greninja loses defense points, because it's already incredibly frail, and now it actually has the ability to hit both kinds of defensive Pokemon, which can be powerful. Now you are sacrificing a specialty, and that's just kind of how Pokemon works. So the idea is, when it comes to natures, for the most part, there's already going to be a competitive guide out there that breaks down all the kinds of natures that Pokemon can use, but I want to make sure you guys understand this at a base level. That way you're not just kind of parroting a guide, and you're understanding what the guide is trying to tell you. By the way, I've done a guide for every single competitive Pokemon, so if you want to start thinking about your team for Pokemon Sword and Shield, and you already have like an existing Pokemon that's a favorite, I recommend searching that Pokemon's name and Verlisify, or finding that video in the playlist down below. That way you can start to get an understanding of how that Pokemon works as we go into the next generation. And of course, I'm going to be doing guides of every Generation 8 Pokemon that comes out, as well as updating guides of Pokemon that receive large changes, or get kind of like a different style of gameplay. So be sure to subscribe, ring that bell, leave a like, comment down below, share with your friends. Get ready for Pokemon Sword and Shield. And going back to natures, I do want to mention that there are some rare cases where you can focus on a Pokemon's non-dominant stat, but that is a very advanced battle strategy, and those shenanigans are forbidden at this beginner stage of the Pokemon Sword and Shield Battle Academy. So, yeah. Also, I do want to talk about acquiring or affecting natures inside of Pokemon games, so I'm going to repeat myself a few more times throughout this video, but as it stands with Pokemon Sword and Shield, we don't really know how nature manipulation is going to work. There was an interview that came out in early October that talks about just being able to change a Pokemon's existing nature, which is something that you can't do in any other Pokemon game, so that's going to have a lot of implications inside of Pokemon Sword and Shield. But as for the existing methods, it's about affecting the Pokemon that you obtain. You can use an Everstone while breeding, you can also use a synchronized Pokemon to try to force your nature onto the opposing Pokemon, and in Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, you talk to Madame Celadon, you tell her what nature you want, and all the Pokemon that you encounter will have that nature. So we're just going to see how it ends up working out for Pokemon Sword and Shield, but those are the basics when it comes to natures. Next up, we have individual values, which is also mentioned as potential inside of the games. So to see a Pokemon's IVs, there is the Judge feature. In Pokemon Sun and Moon and Pokemon Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, you can access the Judge from your PC, and in Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, you press the Y button, and then you get to this page. So it just kind of shows you what your Pokemon's stats look like from a potential perspective. Best means best. That's kind of all that matters. Now, there are times where you do want 0 IVs or some kind of different IV spread on a Pokemon, but once again, that's going to be very Pokemon specific on moveset guides, and it's a bit more advanced than I want to go into for this video. But overall, all that you need to know are that IVs can be anywhere from 0 to 31, and at level 100, 1 stat point is gained per IV that you have. So there is a big difference. If you're trying to think like, oh, breeding doesn't really matter, or all of these IVs and EVs and natures, that's just too tryhard, it doesn't matter. It really does. That if you have a Pokemon with 20 IVs versus 31, you're losing out on a lot of damage, durability, or you're just going to get outsped every time against an opposing Pokemon, and that's not good. So IVs aren't really that much more complex. You just want the best one, and there's many ways of obtaining a max IV. So in Pokemon Sun and Moon, you have SOS battling. SOS battles can get you up to 4 maxed out IVs throughout a Pokemon, so 4 out of 6. Also in Generation 7, there's Hyper Training, so you can use a regular bottle cap to make one stat have max IVs, or a golden bottle cap to make all of the stats have max IVs. However, this can only be used on a level 100 Pokemon. Even going back to Pokemon X and Y, the Friend Safari, all the Pokemon that you capture there will have a set amount of max IVs. The Dex Nav can get you up to 3 max IVs for a Pokemon, depending on how many Pokemon you've seen, and then catch comboing in Pokemon Let's Go. Once you hit a 30 combo, you can have 4 of 6 IVs. Now, just because you use one of these methods also doesn't mean that you can't get more IVs. That you also have a 0 to 32 roll on the other stats, which means that there's a pretty decent chance that through SOS battling or catch comboing, you can get a 5 IV Pokemon with a rare chance of getting a perfect 6 IV Pokemon without breeding or any other kind of methods. Now, when it comes to Pokemon Sword and Shield, we have confirmation that the wild area can have Pokemon with a yellow glow. If you target those Pokemon, they will have a certain amount of max IVs. We don't know how many, we don't know how to modify it, and there's also going to be egg moves, but that's going to be a different guide for obtaining competitive movesets onto Pokemon. And once again, like I said, there's going to be a new training system inside of Pokemon Sword and Shield that lets you get your favorite Pokemon competitive. We don't know how much that's going to impact obtaining perfect competitive Pokemon. But all of this effectively boils down to breeding in the end. That in all Pokemon games, up to Pokemon Sword and Shield, that what you want to do is you want to use SOS, you want to use Dex Nav, you want to use the Friend Safari, and you want to get a distribution of individual values on your Pokemon. Then when you breed with a Destiny Knot, the Destiny Knot will select 5 stats at random from either parent, and then you put those into the offspring Pokemon. So if you have good IVs on your parent Pokemon, eventually you can breed down and have very good IVs on your baby Pokemon. Now, you don't need to go for 6 out of 6 IVs unless you are doing like a crazy hybrid kind of attacker Pokemon. Let's say you have a physical attacking Pokemon. Well, what you want to do is have an Adamant Nature. Adamant Nature buffs the attack and lowers the special attack. So you only need 5 maxed out IVs, with the last one being in special attack, which you're not utilizing anyways, and this is also where RNG comes into play. Then Pokemon Let's Go and through SOS battles, you can just get a straight up competitive ready Pokemon if those 5 individual values land in the same place. Now, since this is a beginner guide, some people don't know what RNG means. RNG means random number generator, so it's effectively luck, that if you get lucky and the right things go to the right places, your RNG is good, and then you can bypass a breeding step, or you can just kind of breed and make sure that Pokemon is purely competitive, again with that last chance of rolling a 0 through 31, and then getting a 6 IV perfect Pokemon. And then the last way of modifying a Pokemon's stats is going to be through effort values. So effort values are referred to as EVs, which means we are not talking about Jolteon, we are talking about modifying a Pokemon's stats even more. So the best way of explaining EVs is that whenever you faint any Pokemon in the wild, you gain an effort value, or you gain a few effort values depending on how you're modifying that Pokemon. So let's say you go and faint a Mareanie. Well, you can just go on Bulbapedia and you can see the Pokemon's EV yield. So for every Mareanie you faint, you gain 1 EV inside of defense. Now, the way that EVs work is that once you get 4 EVs in a stat, so let's say you faint for Mareanie, that means you are going to gain 1 defense point for that Pokemon at level 100, but there is a cap. Once you obtain 252 EVs, or 64 stat points at level 100, then you can't gain any more inside of that stat, and there's going to be a hard cap of 510 for an entire Pokemon. So you can distribute this in any way that you want, but the most common way is maxing out 2 stats. So you can go 252, 252, and then 4. So that's 508 out of 510, but 510 isn't divisible by 4, so you effectively just get a bonus point. Now in Pokemon Sun and Moon, you can see if you've trained your Pokemon properly by pressing Y on their stat page, and that shows the EV breakdown that this Pokemon has obtained. So when you have all the max IVs on a Pokemon, it turns blue, and then it gets sparkly when that stat is maxed out. So on the Samungus, it has max EVs in hit points and max EVs in special defense, and then you can see a little bit of blue right by the yellow on defense, showing that that is where I put my bonus point. But again, you don't have to only put it into 2 stats. That's generally what people want to do. If you have a sweeping Pokemon such as Alakazam, you max out special attack, you max out speed, you put 1 point to hit points for that overall durability. That's kind of how it goes. But for tankier Pokemon, you might want to survive some defensive hits and some special defense, and maybe put in a little bit of offense, and that once again goes back into the individual guides. So you can see some weird stuff like 200 into defense, 200 into special defense, 100 into hit points, something like that, and then maybe a few extra points into speed. That way you outspeed same species Pokemon. Starts getting advanced after that point, but that is effectively how effort values work, and then the individual ways of getting them inside of games are going to be different, and then you can just max them out through those methods. Now, you might have noticed at the beginning of the video there was something called AVs. I don't want to confuse you, and I want to make it clear that this is completely separate to Pokemon Sword and Shield, but AVs, or Awaken values, were utilized inside of Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. Whenever you were giving your Pokemon candy and they were gaining stat points, you can actually get plus 200 in all of a Pokemon's stats. But I did want to mention it because AVs kind of function the same as EVs, just for Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. Don't worry about it too much, we're probably not going to see them again, or at least for a while, until the next Pokemon Let's Go game. And that is everything that you need to know about how stats work inside of Pokemon, so now let's visualize it with a team builder. Right now we're using Pokemon Showdown, and they have everything about every Pokemon. The full stats spread, you can play around with the IVs, you can play around with the natures, you have all the abilities, you have all the movesets. Those are going to be upcoming Battle Academy videos, so like I said earlier, like, comment, subscribe. And I could have kind of used this for the majority of the video, but that's kind of cheaty, and I want to make sure that you really understood everything that I'm talking about. And now, if you've seen this before and you've gotten confused, or you've looked up other Pokemon movesets and guides and didn't really make sense, now it should make complete sense to you. So let's take Alakazam for example. Kind of already talked about it earlier, but what we want to do is we want to max out this Pokemon in every possible way. So it has a very high special attack, which means that if we put 252 EVs into its special attack, it's going to be good to go. Then we can also kind of plan out its nature. So we have a drop-down list and it says everything. Timid plus speed minus attack, Jolly plus speed minus special attack, Lonely plus attack minus defense. Well, we're definitely not going to want that. We're buffing one of its lowest stats and then also reducing one of its lowest stats, so that's not going to help us out at all. So we do want to give it a timid nature, and then we also want to make sure that we get the most benefit out of that timid nature by adding a full spread of effort values to it. So what this means is that we will outspeed every Pokemon with less than 120 base speed, and we will speed tie with a 50-50 chance against other Pokemon that have a speed boosting nature, such as Hasty, Naive, Jolly, or Timid, and then also maxed out EVs. So that's going to be what an Alakazam looks like, utilizing the most out of what we have, and then that one little point into hit points. Sometimes it can matter. You ever survive on 1 hit points? Happens. So now let's go and just kind of like find a random Pokemon and play around with its stats for a bit. So let's go with something like Venusaur. Venusaur, this is where we start getting into those more complicated things because it is a really well-rounded tank Pokemon, but it also starts building the ideas of what you want to do. Now moves and abilities are going to be very important for building this, but like I said, for now we can just kind of mess around with a few things. So looking at it, has a very high special attack at 122. So what we can do is bring out that modest nature. We're not going to be doing any kind of physical attacks. It's actually one of the lowest stats, but 80 speed is still respectable, so we don't want to get outsped by anything that could be slower than us. And also, a lot of Pokemon have that 80 speed, so we might want to speed tie or speed creep around them. And speed creeping, once again, there's going to be another guide that's upcoming that gets a bit more technical, is kind of like, instead of putting your random 4 points into speed, kind of put 8. Maybe you put 12. You're just really safe, and then that means you're going to be outspeeding every Pokemon. But also, another thing to note, and this does complicate things a bit, that when you're playing on official competitive formats, generally Pokemon are brought down to level 50. So this is what's going to change how IVs and EVs work. So right here, we have 140 on the special defense. Well, at 0, it's 125. So, like I said, at level 100, you're gaining 31 points, but if you're at level 50, it's going to be roughly half. Also at level 50, 30 IVs are acceptable, and those are referred to as fantastic IVs in the judge. So if you know you're going to be playing in a strictly level 50 format, a fantastic IV isn't going to change anything about that. So if you get that lucky-ish, unlucky roll, still going to be a very usable Pokemon. Also, as you can see, it's going to change how EVs work in some cases. It goes 4, 12, 20, 28. So on a level 50 format, if you want to speed creep, you'd have to kind of go for that 12, or maybe even a 20, if you just want to make sure you're outspeeding any kind of creeped 80 base speed Pokemon. So then we can put the rest into special attack. That's just going to be monstrous, and since our hit points are kind of low, we can do this. So that means we're going to get outsped by most Pokemon. We take the hit, and then we send a much larger hit back, and it just kind of like shows the effectiveness of the IVs, the EVs, all the stuff like that. Then in theory, 0 IVs or whatever random roll we get for that, depending on what the outcome is from breeding, chaining, SOS battle, etc., etc. And that's relatively what it's going to look like. So if you were going to go for some other weird spreads, like I said, anything is possible. If you want to do something like that, for whatever reason, say you need like a slightly more defensively focused Mega Venusaur, but you want to survive like the odd special attack, then maybe there's a range where a certain Pokemon using Ice Beam, you'll survive because of these extra points right here compared to the extra hit points you've invested. That's where it starts getting really technical, complicated. That's when you want to use my strategy guides as, again, a guideline to figure out where to take that Pokemon. But you can do anything with those 510 EVs. That's also where the 252 plus comes into play. That's just like the bonus EVs that don't really mean anything. But yeah, you max out the Pokemon, you're going to be good to go from there, and that's really what it's about. So we'll wait and see what happens with Pokemon Sword and Shield, how you train your Pokemon, how you get everything competitive, and then hopefully this guide works. If it does, leave a like, share with your friends, get them into getting good at Pokemon, and I'll see you guys for the next episode of the Pokemon Sword and Shield Battle Academy. Hope you all enjoy the video, have a nice day, thank you very much for watching.